Hello, and welcome to the Unsung Cyberhero Adventures TV network. Today's show focuses on answering the question, what are the cybersecurity strengths and weaknesses within the energy ecosystem? In other words, can an adversary take down the grid? Stay tuned to find out. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online, while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and information technology community. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include the video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. That's also why we're called a TV network. We're all about information sharing and business to business networking. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. This is especially valuable now that the community's primary way of conducting business, conferences, has been put on hold for the foreseeable future. Our special solo guest is Tobias Whitney, Vice President of Energy Security Solutions at Fortress Information Security. He has 20 plus years of critical infrastructure security experience, which includes founding the security practice at Burns McDonnell and a focus on regulatory compliance, supply chain, and cloud security. Most recently, Whitney spent 2 years as technical executive at the EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, evaluating risks in supply chain, cybersecurity for utilities, developing solutions to address security architecture for utility cloud-based solutions, as well as researching grid edge technologies such as electric vehicle charging and distributed energy infrastructure. Tobias, we're so glad you're here with us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about your origin story. You've had, an incredibly interesting and long career, and it touched on today's theme, which is something to do with energy and power. And the world counts on it and relies on it, and there's a lot that's unknown about it. And from what I understand, you're just the person to answer these kinds of questions for us.
Oh, well, thank you. And again, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again, Gary. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I started roughly 20 years ago in the 1998, 99, 2000 timeframe. And that was when industry was very much concerned about the Y2K bug. And at the time, I was hired by an auditing company to do system audits. And shortly after my start with system audits, they realized that I knew a thing or two about hacking into organizations, and they put me up with a group of other technical gentlemen as opposed to doing auditing. What we were paid to do ultimately was to do attack and penetration. So I spent 4 years at PwC doing that.
Well, wait. Let me just pause you there 1 second, because when our audience hears attack and penetration, that kind of could mean the bad guys. Were you and your eyebrows? So it's one of the benefits of being able to see you. Were you? How do you describe that? Were you a good guy, bad guy, something in between?
I was a good guy. Trust me, I was a really, really good guy. It's just that I was working with companies who financed our work to act like we were bad guys and to do the things that bad guys were doing and use some of the tools that the bad guys were using on the internet, either through dial-up or through the internet or through physical access to buildings, where we would access networks, do social engineering, and ultimately gain the keys to the kingdoms of some relatively large companies within a pretty short period of time. I think my record to get root or get domain admin for a Fortune 100 company was like 20 minutes. It doesn't take that long to know what you're doing.
Well, you've already said just a bunch of incredibly interesting things. Let me just take you back for a moment to this idea of social networking. Can you, just give the audience just a quick, maybe blinded example of, some of the social networking you did? Like, what is that? What is social networking?
So social engineering, social networking.
Yeah,
social engineering. So that is the process of gaining information, what we call enticement information about an individual. Enticement information is a bunch of things about who you are, where you work, things about you that could help me better understand how to exploit weaknesses in security to ultimately become you on the network at some point. And ultimately, you know, an example would be I'd call Susie that worked in accounts payable, and I'd say, hey, Susie, we were doing a batch update last night. Your account was associated with that update. I believe that your account is Susie at, and then she would fill in the blanks for us, because you know most normal people are nice, and she has to go, oh yeah, I'm Susie such and such, this is my account, and yeah, all we need to do is just log in, and once we get access, we can go ahead and complete that batch program, that batch job, and after that's completed, we'll go ahead and send you an email and let you know everything is all clear. So all we would need you to do is log in. As a matter of fact, if you could just give me your password, I can log in here, and we wouldn't even have to bother you.
Oh, no.
And
how often does that work?
Well, you know what? It didn't work that often, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't work that often. If I do it often enough, at the right times, at the right places, all I need is just a couple of Susies. Obviously, there's several within organizations. All I need is a couple individuals to say, here's my password. And once I get in, that's the thing with security. You know, folks worry about, well, how can you find a needle in the haystack? You know, if you're looking at statistical, you know, means of what's material, I think the accountants I used to worry about, like, well, it's an immaterial amount of, you know, cash that's missing in the accounts receivable or whatever. That's different from cybersecurity weaknesses, because 1 out of a million, or 1 out of 1,000, or 1 out of several 100,000 is relatively easy for for a hacker, or script kiddie, or someone that has means to several of these exploit tools out here to quickly sort through the haystacks, sort through the straws of hay to find the needle within hours and minutes, as opposed to just ignoring potential vulnerability. So, you know, large numbers like that is not a deterrent.
Wow.
For a bad guy.
I mean, so does this happen in the energy sector?
Well, it hasn't happened a tremendous amount, but we are seeing a few things here and there within industry. A few years ago, there's a big hack in Ukraine. There's a public utility there that was compromised by some potential bad guys. I think there might have possibly been Russian hackers at the time that took control of the grid and ultimately destroyed some critical equipment that allowed the good guys to be able to effectively manage the grid when the hack was taking place. In the United States, North America, we haven't seen domestically a tremendous amount of attacks that have caused an impact to the local system. Primarily, I think that's due to a lot of best practices and standards that industry has developed and implemented and ultimately are held accountable to via the North American Electric Reliability Standards, the cybersecurity standards called CIP, Critical Infrastructure Protection. They've been implemented for over a decade. So far, we haven't had a big attack yet, but I think everyone knows that it's probably coming, and we're doing all we can to mitigate those risks.
And, you know, in terms of this designation of critical infrastructure, you know, everybody needs, you know, power. I can't think of anything more critical than that, not just to damage, you know, the world or society, but to cause panic, you know, because you would like literally be in the dark. When you were a regulator and on kind of the other side of this ecosystem, you know, what kinds of things were you thinking of putting in place, you know, to really just hold the industry to these standards to ensure that they're safe?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, I wasn't a hacker my entire career. I did turn in my hacking keyboard and my equipment, and I worked on more policy-related activities. And you're right, at North American Electric Reliability Corporation a few years ago, I was a regulator responsible for the SIP programs there. But what some of the things that I really was focused on is where we have changes in technology, where we have advancements in technology, evolution if you will, where we went from a certain type of functionality, such as your typical client server environment that was housed within the confines on-prem of a utility, and they were starting to evaluate, well, man, maybe I can leverage some of these cloud-based technologies. So where there were advancements in technology that wasn't fully contemplated by the standards, I actually focused on that. And I have developed lessons learned, frequently asked questions with actual answers, real answers to how we can view some of these technologies through the lens of compliance, so that as companies are investing in these solutions, at least have some roadmap, some guidance in terms of how to navigate the regulatory construct around these.
Yeah, and so, you talk about compliance, which worked, more effectively? Was it the carrot or the stick, in terms of compliance? Because you probably had both.
It really depends. Right now, the sticks that our regulators have, FERC and NERC, and the fines, the penalties that are associated with non-compliance aren't significant. They're not trying to put energy companies out of business. However, there is a fully recognized authority that NERC has, is to impose fines up to $1 million a day per violation. And that's out there. So if you're egregious, if an entity is absolutely egregious and doesn't want to follow the rules to the letter of the law, then yes, there is that stick that will ultimately be used to make whatever changes that are made within that organization. But for the most part, I've seen industry do a really good job of understanding what the standards require and see that as a floor or as an enabler to go much more above that, to actually implement some of the best practices that you want to see from a security perspective. So I would say that's probably more of what we've seen, is folks just saying, hey, we understand what's needed for compliance, but we're going to do more than that.
One of the interesting things that I've experienced listening and learning, to subject matter experts, is that, the bad guys, freely share information, through the undocumented web. Some people call it the dark web or unindexed, web. But kind of the defenders are a little bit less likely to do that. Is that true? And really more importantly, do you see that in the energy ecosystem? People are willing to share, let's say, threat information or best practices?
Yeah, I would say that the infrastructure is there. One of the affiliated organizations with NERC, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, was the EISAC, the Electric Sector Information Sharing and Analytics Center. So the idea was, if you see something, say something, call the EISAC, and the EISAC would help communicate what those issues were throughout industry. And I think that's been relatively effective. Where we might have challenges with that is a lot of times, and I used to notice this when I was a hacker, started my career, I would own someone's PC during the day, and I'd move their mouse around and they'd move it back, and while they're typing
something. Why did you do that?
And well, let me finish. And I wasn't.
No, because that happened to me, and it that shit. And I want to know, why did you do that? And you're laughing. And why are you laughing?
Well, okay, it is a little bit amusing, but you'd open up their CD-ROM drive. That we don't even have those now, most of our laptops. So we typed something they didn't even realize they typed. But the point is that, are they going to react to this? Shouldn't they be calling their help desk or their security department to find out and say, hey, what's going on with my machine? Why is it behaving this way? Normally, folks just go about their day and just assume that it was just something weird that was happening in their work program.
Wow.
And I worry that at a grander scale, and I was given a very simple example with that, but I worry at a grander scale that whether or not we would ever know that we've been hacked. We have a lot of technology misoperations. One of the most widely recognized reasons why we have any incidents on the grids is because of the technology or communications failure. And they're pretty much tracked as that. But hackers are not usually very good at leaving a calling card unless they're trying to use that calling card to exploit more information from you. But if they're causing an outage or impact to potentially the grid or any other type of process control environment, they're not going to leave a whole lot of breadcrumbs that says, I hacked you. You'd have to deduce from the various informations that you have.
Well, I just, you know, on a very incredibly amateurish level, just this very morning, found malicious code on my computer, and it was designed to redirect my computer when it sought a Wi-Fi network to go to a spoofed Wi-Fi network. And
Wow.
and so I saw this literally a folder and all these different things in it, some pictures, you know, that I recognized, but then I saw these, you know, 6 or 8 little sort of lines, and so I just put them, you know, on the internet on Google, and then whoosh, this whole hacking thing comes out. You know, I mean, like 200 pages of information. I'm going, what?
Yeah, that's the oh shucks moment that people
It
tend
was
to
not oh
have.
shucks. I assure you, that is not what I said.
I'll be substituted.
And why are you laughing again? You know, that's when I need to get at this kernel, no pun intended. You know, what motivates bad people to do this stuff? Is it because they can,
Well,
you know, and they're just, you know, smarter?
a lot of it. Yeah, a lot of it's for financial gain. You know, that's where you hear the term ransomware, and we are starting to see, you know, some utilities, some electric power companies be exposed to some ransomware attacks where they send you malware that you received. You know, they will send you a breadcrumb or a little communication that says, yes, I own your machine, and if you ever want to get your data back again, here's the account where you need to wire the funds to, and then at that point, I'll give you your life back.
Are you supposed to pay if you know, if someone, let's say a small to medium business, you know, is the victim of ransomware, are they supposed to pay it?
Well, that really depends on each and every single company and those individuals. If you don't have an effective backup, and if there's no other means that you can get your information back in order for you to resume operations as a business, then at that point you better figure out a way to get your information back. That means the life of your company is in limbo. But ransomware is sort of the simplest level of kind of what we're worried about. I mean, but if you look at critical infrastructure, what we're spending a lot of time on, especially with Fortress and my role there as Vice President of Energy Solutions, is to make sure that, yeah, we're helping to mitigate the risk of ransomware, but we're also trying to make sure that each of the vendors that are used on the grid, and there's only a finite set, you know, it's not the universe of technologies that you see in banking and finance and retail and all that. It's a relatively finite set of technologies used to operate the grid. And we realize that the vendors, our suppliers, our manufacturers, play a critical piece in ensuring security. Right now, the regs only are applicable primarily to the utility owners and operators. But for the folks that serve the technology to them, they could be a very significant exploit, a threat path.
Yeah, I mean, the whole supply chain, right?
And that's the whole supply chain. So we're worried that there's some code that's associated with a control system that was developed and fabricated and integrated, put together, and shipped out from overseas, installed in the United States, assuming that it meets all the specifications, but there's a little chip, there's a kernel running in the background that no one knew was there. It wasn't part of the specification. It wasn't part of what was in the RFP. And if you're not a computer engineer or electrical engineer, you're probably not going to be able to open up the motherboard and look at the physical chassis of the machine and recognize something is there that shouldn't be there. And that could be a potential backdoor, that could be an attack path, that can cause potentially some significant impact to the grid.
Well,
and that's what we want to make sure.
This is, you know, what allegedly, you know, or maybe you can confirm happened with Huawei, you know, and they're, you know, is that true?
Well, I don't know if I could speak to that detail, but I am familiar with some of those concerns. And frankly, if we are dealing with, and this is recently was communicated via the executive order that was submitted by the White House late last week on Friday, was to address the concern that not every nation that develops systems associated with those that are used on the grid, not every nation should be allowed to use and develop systems on the grid that we are ultimately going to be responsible for. And if they're associated with hostile nation states, if they're being developed in hostile nation states, what that order is talking about and what we're getting at Huawei, the Huawei issue is maybe we need to have additional controls to mitigate those types of risks, serving from those countries that might be providing products that we are really reliant on. So,
how do you do that if you're talking about an industrial control system, for example, or even an operation control system, and you have a component part that you get from, as to use your description, let's say a hostile, nation. I mean, how do you do that? How do you ensure, that everything is as it should be?
Well, one of the things that we're doing to help the industry and our customers that are part of the Fortress's asset to vendor network is to give them tools that they can identify who are the manufacturers, who are the suppliers of those particular vendors, where are these components being developed. We have what we call a provenance snapshot, which that gives you an understanding of where the vendor has cyber presence abroad, where they have physical presence abroad, where they have manufacturing capabilities abroad. And of those locations, are they associated with hostile adversarial nations? And if so, we want to make sure that we arm industry with the information at that level of detail, or even greater, to make sure that they can make appropriate decisions about whether or not they'll continue to source from those countries and those vendors, and then maybe how to mitigate some of those risks on the back end.
Well, I really love and appreciate the word provenance, applied to this. I had the privilege of interviewing recently Sam Bisner from MITRE. He runs the federally funded research center that focuses on cybersecurity. And one of the really interesting things that I learned about what they do is they're kind of like an umbrella organization, setting best practices for architecture and systems and things like that. Do they deal with provenance in this way? Is there a way to share this kind of information? Is that your intention at where you work?
Yes. So our intention is to serve industry in the best way that we can, and we through the asset to vendor network is to give electric power utilities and other critical infrastructure. Could even be associated with the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, water, what have you. But as it relates to critical infrastructure, provide a network of utilities and companies and information that they can all access about their supply chain and supply chain security profile. So provenance is a big part of that. Also recognizing any inherent vulnerabilities associated with the technology that you're procuring. It's one thing to understand how that technology may work in a bubble or in a vacuum, but then understanding how those controls associated with that technology meld with your existing architecture within your environment. That's a place where we add a tremendous amount of value as well. So this is a newer and developing area as it relates to understanding supply chain security for the grid. The NERC standards just recently approved within the last 18 months their first supply chain security standard. That's going to go into effect October 1 of this year. And then we'll start seeing, as more and more companies, especially on the grid, are held accountable to making sure that they're managing their vendors appropriately, we'll understand what some of those best practices that will come out of that. And we'll be working with industry to deliver that as well.
As we're just kind of winding down, I could listen to you for years, so thank you for sharing all your wisdom. So, talking about certification, I recently was honored to give a speech pertaining to the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification that the Department of Defense is setting forth. And basically, it's all about supply chain. They have around 300,000 contractors, something like that, and they're attempting to have minimum level 1 up to kind of level 5 standards for cybersecurity because of the vulnerabilities. Does Fortress, are you involved in that process, or any of your colleagues? And while you're at it, tell me a little bit more about your company.
Yeah, so we're definitely working in concert with some of the efforts in the Department of Defense. We're very familiar with the CMMC, recognizing its place. It's like I said, the 13 standard. It's a relatively new activity. A lot of the DoD facilities and agencies are just now getting their arms around it, and the tools that we ultimately produce and create for industry at Fortress are to help them manage supply chain and third-party risks. So as it relates to understanding the security profile of the vendors and the partners that each utility or critical infrastructure company deals with, our customers come to us and help to manage what those risks are, understand what they are, and then understand how to mitigate any particular security that might be associated with security risk that might be associated with those partnerships. So there's a tool that you can learn more about by going to fortressinfosec.com. You can learn more about the Fortress platform, the A to B network, and the rest of the team that can be here to support industry.
Well, that's just terrific. So, you completely exceeded the definition of our podcast, which is to shine a light on the unsung heroes who toil in anonymity to keep us safe. So, on behalf of the digital universe, thank you so much. We'll have more information about you and your organization in the show notes. And stay safe and stay home for a while.
I will do that, Gary. Thank you. I appreciate your time. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.